Well, welcome everyone to our chapter's October gathering. I'm Denise Gendusa. I think most of you know me by now. Today we have an amazing Ask the Editor panel, including Gretchen Stelter, I'm sorry,
That's okay.
Valerie Beal, and
Happens
Kim
a lot.
Keller Blakemore, moderated by our platform host, Tracey Phillips. Before we begin, I just want to share the flow of the call. Tracey will be introducing and moderating the panel, followed by a Q&A for all of you to ask your questions. So it's my pleasure to always introduce Tracey Phillips, our Sisters in Crime chapter leader, author of Best Kept Secrets, and the founding member of Blackbird Writers. So I'll turn it over to Tracey.
Hi, thank you so much, Denise, and thanks so much for moderating. Welcome to our Wisconsin Sisters in Crime meeting, Ask an Editor. And I am so pleased today to introduce three panelists. We have Kim Taylor Blakemore from Oregon, and she is the author of most recently The Deception and some other historical fiction novels, and also the founder of Novelitics, which is an editing group. I'll let you describe that. Gretchen Stelter is a newly implanted Wisconsin editor with a lot of projects under her belt. And Valerie Beal is the founder and owner of Lost Lake Press, and she has editing services that are amazing for authors, editing and other marketing services. And she's also the author of a YA series called the Circle of Nine series. Welcome, ladies. Yeah, let's start. I'm going to go around clockwise, I guess. And on my screen, Kim, you get to be first. Would you please introduce yourself and your books and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me here, since I am not from Wisconsin, but I love Tracey. I'm Kim Taylor Blakemore, and I write historical fiction about dangerous women. So my last book was called The Deception, and that just came out September 27th. I have also written After Alice Fell, which was a Silver Falchion winner. And The Companion, those were all historical thrillers. And my historical fiction is Bowery Girl and Sissy Funk. Both of those are YA. And I also, in addition to writing, I am a developmental editor and have a writing organization or group called Novelitics, where people join from all over the US and Canada for weekly workshops and meetups and morning write-ins and writing challenges. So that is me. And Valerie, I'm going to say something about you because Valerie's amazing. She's helping me do all my marketing for The Deception and all my other books and the book coming up. So I want to say thank you to you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's fun. It's fun to see it when things work well. And so far, so good.
Valerie, why don't you go ahead? Go next.
Okay, so I am a published author. I indie pub my series. It's Circle of Nine, and it is Celtic mythology, magic-based paranormal for YA. And my background, though, I have a degree in journalism from UW-Madison, and my background really was more in nonprofit work and public relations, publicity. So when I switched gears to writing full-time, I ended up putting, that background to work and realized how wonderful it was to have had that, experience to be able to use that to help on my own work, but also to help other authors. So now I do that through my company, Lost Lake Press, which originally started just as my imprint name, my company name for my indie pub effort. So now I work with authors all over to help them market their books. I also work with other authors to help them get started. So that includes editing, but it also includes things like getting your platform set up. So from, sometimes people will come to me and they're still writing their very first book. And that's a great place to start because you can get everything in place properly before it's time to launch a book or seek out agents or, traditionally published like with editors. So I do all kinds of fun things. It depends on the week. And sometimes I have so many different projects. It keeps me busy, and I consider it my anti-dementia campaign that I keep my brain working on all fronts. So
Yeah, thank you. And Gretchen.
Yeah, so you guys heard already, I'm a recent transplant to Wisconsin from Portland, Oregon. When I was in Portland, I actually transferred to Portland State University from a university in Australia, and did their book publishing program for my master's degree. And while I was there, I met a woman by the name of Bernadette Baker, who is now Bernadette Baker Bachman. Quite the mouthful. She's an agent now at Victoria Sanders and Associates. At the time, we were just starry-eyed young 20-year-olds who thought we could start a literary agency just because we thought it was a cool idea there on the West Coast. And we did, with a heavy mentorship from Victoria Sanders, and sort of focused a lot in graphic novels because it was right when they were becoming really popular. And we were right there on the West Coast where a lot of the creators and the publishers were. So we did that for about 5 years, had a decent amount of success with it, but I realized right away that I was not as good at the book stuff or at the business stuff. I didn't like the negotiating and all of that. It wasn't where my passion was. So I started about 2.5 years in, I started editing for all of our clients instead. I was the one who did all of that. I wrote all the query letters, I did all the proposals, I polished all the manuscripts. And while doing that, of course, we weren't making money yet. So I also was copy editing and proofreading for publishing houses. So when we realized that Bernadette was really going to take off with the agenting and move to New York, and Victoria was sort of going to put Baker's Mark under the umbrella of Victoria Sanders and Associates and all that, I was bought out and started editing full time. And because I had by virtue of the fact that agenting requires you to have a huge network, I already had a huge network of people, but they were all in traditional publishing. And so that's why when I was talking to Tracey, that is my cat Hyphen. I apologize. He'll probably make an appearance at some point, and actually on camera instead of just yelling at us. Hyphen, because he's always in the middle of things. Anyway, so I'm like, my intro is so long. I'm so sorry. So anyway, yeah, I already had that network in place. And so I started, thank you. I started editing full time. And luckily, like I said, I had all of that in place. And when Tracey and I were talking about me doing this panel, I kind of mentioned that, all of my experience is with traditional publishing. So I really kind of have that like hole in my experience of, I have a couple of clients who do self-publish, but it really is just a couple because I don't know it myself. And then they ask questions like, what about marketing? What about this? And I'm like, hey. So I'm so happy to also meet a couple of other editors who do have more of this, kind of experience that I can also refer people to. That's amazing. So that was my very long intro.
Thanks.
Hyphen.
Well, it's so great to have you guys here. And what a great, interesting group and challenge for asking questions too. So let me just start. When people are looking for editors, whether they're traditional or indie published, editors like agents need to love the books that they're working on. So what are you guys looking for when you take on a client? Valerie, do you want to start this one?
Sure, I can. Well, let's just put it out there. I have certainly edited books for people that I have not, wouldn't be a book that would be my favorite to pick up and read. I think you can do that. I think it certainly helps to love the subject matter, but it's a professional thing. You can certainly do that. There are, though, some types of books that I tend not to edit because they're just not really in my wheelhouse. I'm not super fond of business books, like nonfiction business books. I tend to be very selective with the memoir type books that I'll edit. Let's be honest here, too. Not everybody's life's worthy of a book, right? I mean, that sounds mean, But that's why I don't really want to edit memoir as much anymore, because if there's a lot of people who come to this thinking that their life is so worthy of a book, and often the goal really should be shifted to writing it for your family or for your grandchildren or your children, and not really commercial. So sometimes I guide clients in that way. The other thing I'm not really interested in editing is self-help. So I mean, I don't read a lot of self-help. Maybe I should. I don't know. But I definitely have things, and I love. I mean, I would prefer, to edit the books that I love to read. Clearly, so I tend to, if someone comes to me and they have a book that I'm not sure of, or really any client, we just make sure that what I would provide, like the first 2 chapters, I give them a sample edit. They know what they're going to get back from me. And I explain what a final document will look like. Because of course, with 2 chapters, you don't do the long final document, like watch for this or this and this. But you get that first 2 chapters, and then whether or not you want, with the bid for the full book. And then they know whether or not they are going to be comfortable with what product they get back from me. So, but those are the ones, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I should be more open to it, but memoir is tricky because it's someone's life and people get touchy, and yeah, that can be very hard.
I'm sure it's sensitive.
It is sensitive. There you go. Sensitive.
Thanks. Gretchen, what are you looking for when you're taking on a client?
Mainly, I'm just looking for someone that I know I can work well with, because if I've worked on books in almost every genre, to be honest, but like Valerie said, like there are some that I haven't loved, but again, especially when I was first starting out and I was doing mainly copy editing and proofreading, it was like, and I was trying to make a living, and I had a network, but not one super, so I was just, I was a freelance. I mean, I still am. So I had that desperate freelancer. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do that. So, I mean, I worked on a lot of self-help, and Valerie, you're not missing much. And I don't think you probably have to read any of it. That's very mean of me to say. It's just really not my cup of tea. I know it helps a lot of people. It's just really, really not my cup of tea. I found that a lot of the authors I ended up working with were the ones that like needed their book the most. They were like, let go of your ego. And I'm like, what? You fought with me about a paragraph for like 2 weeks. Let go of your ego, pal. So anyway, so I think that's part of it though, is like, I mean, there are certain genres that I love. Thriller is one of them. I can thank the amazing Constantine sisters who write under Liv Constantine. I worked on their book, The Last Mrs. Parrish, and they've been amazing with giving, recommending me to so many people. So that's actually the bulk of the genre I work on these days, at least developmentally. So I would say that when I'm looking for a client to do developmental work with, it has to be a genre that I feel very comfortable in, because I don't want to be telling them like, ooh, this doesn't really make sense. And they're like, that was in like the most recent 10 sci-fi bestsellers, like, okay, I don't really know that. I read some sci-fi, not that much. So it would have to, for me, be a genre I feel very comfortable being the reader's proxy in. And then also for me, it comes down to the working relationship, because I have had people over the years, not many, luckily the intuition kicks in a lot when you get into the longer conversations with people, when you do the sample and then you talk to them on the phone, you're sort of like, ooh. And there've been a few that I had that red flag went ding, and I still went, no, I think I can really help though. And I worked on it. And in the end, it was not great because they didn't like working with me for whatever reason. And I had trouble communicating in the way that they would respond to best. And so in the end, they ended up paying me for work that I got to admit, they probably didn't respect. Because for whatever reason, the working relationship was not, it was not a good reciprocal kind of a thing. So mainly it's sort of that. And I'm a pretty easygoing person when it comes to the editing. It's like, if you don't want to listen to me, it's fine. It's, it's your buck that you're paying me with, and it's your baby. But, I also don't want that to be the case. I don't want someone walking away going, wow, I just paid a bunch of money to this woman and I didn't like her feedback. I don't want to do any of it. So for me, that's what it is. It comes down to like, are we going to actually have like a symbiotic relationship that you're going to feel comfortable listening to me as an expert? And if I start to get that red flag where they're already sort of pushing back on things that I say in initial conversations, normally I'll gently shift them to a few other editors that I know and say, yeah, I think this one might be a better fit for this, for whatever reason. So for me, that's really what it is. It comes down to genre expertise and how we feel when we're like, on the phone, and if it's going to be a good relationship or not. And I think that's the same for agents too. I feel like if you talk to an agent or a publisher and you're like, I'm getting like a hinky thing in the back of my neck, like listen to it. And I know it can be hard because it's like, oh, but this agent wants me, this publisher wants me. And it's like, but if you're getting that thing, like it's good to listen to it, think about it, take a step back.
Yeah. Good advice. Very good. And Kim, so what are you looking for when you take on somebody?
Well, I like them. I try and take on things within very specific areas. So I specialize in historical fiction, historical thrillers and mysteries, and women's fiction, and some mainstream fiction, but mostly those. Because like that's my wheelhouse. That's like Gretchen said, it needs to be in your wheelhouse. If I did a romance, I wouldn't really know what the tropes were. I tried to write one and killed the person off in page 10. This didn't work. So I thought, I'm not probably good at that. I probably shouldn't edit those, do developmental edits of those. So I think when clients come to me, there's two clients. There's ones you don't know. There's the ones you're recommended or you've read before. So if there are people that I've read their books before, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. Tell me the story. Let's go. This is how I work. I'll give you this feedback within the document. I have a very detailed report. We do Zoom calls as often as you want. We do two rounds of edits if you want. So that's great. And if it's someone I don't know who's come to me from either a referral or anything like that, I do a sample edit for them and then a shorter report. And again, we meet in Zoom. So they sort of see the same series of things I do. And then I can see if we're going to work together. And most of the time that has been fine. I think the hardest was I worked with someone who it was her first book. And I actually thought it's too early to have a developmental editor for your book. And I really thought about it and I sort of talked to her and then we decided she was learning so much from it because I could say, okay, this is how a thriller is structured. So this is technically and practically what you could look at and change. And so it ended up being a really, really good experience for the two of us. So that's
good.
What I say.
Yeah. So let's assume that the writing is there when you accept this manuscript, and the story is there. Can you tell us what is the number one thing that you find wrong with manuscripts? Is there a number one thing? And how is it that you can help the manuscript along? Gretchen?
Number one thing, that's hard.
Yeah. Is there a number one thing?
I mean, honestly, sometimes it kind of comes in waves. Like it's like I'm looking at a manuscript and like, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wow, the last like 4 out of like 6 I've worked on have had this wrong with it. It's almost like problems go in the same way that like tropes do when you're like, wow, I've read 6 thrillers recently and everyone, the main character ended up with with some sort of mental health issue. And you're like, wow, that's a thing. So sometimes it kind of comes in like there are trends where suddenly I think people are maybe trying to write to a trend or something. And so maybe that's what comes. I'm like, wow, that's a problem I keep coming to. But one that I have seen a decent amount of recently is the struggle to understand, tell, and show, because the old adage, show, don't tell is not really accurate. It's more like show and tell and know when to do both, because you really have to teach your reader how to read your manuscript. And so there are a lot of, I find a lot of manuscripts, especially people who haven't worked with an editor before, they sort of come to it and are like, you know, oh, show. And then you're like, wow, I think you're not getting that, like, you don't need to explain to me that, like, she went to the car and she opened the door and she put her key in the ignition and she turned the key. And then, you know, like, wow, that's like a lot of showing. That's like a lot of stage business. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about emotional showing. So I think that might be one of them. And also dialogue that doesn't move the story along. A lot of times, even if the dialogue is fantastically snappy and you're kind of like, ooh, it's like, okay, it's gone on too long now. Like, what am I doing here? Like, I get the tone and it's fun, but like, why have we just had like 2 pages of this? So I think that's it too, is like knowing when to, especially if someone is good at writing dialogue, it can be hard to cut that bait. You know, you got to kill your darlings, and that can be a difficult one, because it's like, this is really good dialogue, but like, it's not necessarily useful to the story. Like, I'm just reading a Bond villain, him going back and forth sort of a thing. Like, why am I still just getting snappy retorts? It's like Spider-Man scripts or something. So yeah, those are the 2 things I would say, is not fully understanding show and tell. And then, yeah, dialogue that doesn't quite actually do what it's supposed to.
Interesting. Kim, what do you find is there a number one thing?
I would agree on the show, don't tell. And I think it's the over explaining of things. Again, the stage business for sure. This is absolutely true. Like, stop telling me the whole drive from here to here. I don't need it unless somebody dies in the car, or I need to know so divorce happens in the car, accident happens. Okay, I'll get it. No, but really showing, you know, being able to describe to them, hey, this is a great paragraph, or this is a great chapter, but I think this could be trimmed. And this is showing, or you've said the same thing 3 times. So this is the line that's really important, that resonates. It's important. And I would say enter late, leave early. So I try and tell them how much into the scene. It's like, you could start here. And it's generally 3 or 4 paragraphs into a scene. It'll be like, start the chapter here and you'll watch. And I try to have people, particularly newer writers, to say, you want the reader to drop in the scene and be a little bit at unease of what's going on, because that keeps them at attention for what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it. And passive verbs. Just, oh, wow. I do them, so I can say, oh, wow, to myself too. That's it. But mostly it's other things. It's very, very specific to the writer, what their things are.
So passive verbs are probably something that people can self-edit out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do that search for was, were, any of those, right?
Yep.
Valerie, what do you think?
I agree with both Kim and Gretchen on all of that. I mean, that entering, you know, late, leave early. We need to trust our readers, right? And not over explain things. That's one of the things that drives me nuts. And that balance then between narration and dialogue. Sometimes I'll do color coding so that people can see, like, you know, to highlight the balance in a way. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfectly balanced, but if someone's really more one thing than the other and they've kind of lost that balance, that color coding can really, you know, pop that, as, you know, explain that for them. And they go, ooh, yes, I see what you mean with the color coding behind it. I would say, I guess you're saying if the writing's there, and this is sort of like when it's not quite yet. And I particularly see this with new writers, where we're starting chapters with the same thing. Like, we do not need to start the chapter with waking up every morning. We do not need to start the chapter with eating breakfast or like whatever. And they haven't quite mastered where to leave off with the previous chapter to keep that momentum going and the page turning going. And that's a little tricky. So I do a lot of help with that. And that tends to be people who are newer, and usually it's a first novel. What else? Sometimes, you know, people don't have enough, the stakes aren't high enough. They haven't plotted out something that's, you know, the plot's a little flat, you know, it doesn't bring us up to a nice apex. So I do see that a little bit. Let's see, what else did I write here?
I find that in the second act, particularly. I don't know if you do too, but like, it's like
Yeah.
they came up with something amazing and they have an amazing, like to insight stuff and they have an amazing ending, but like this, the second act, you're like, oh, wow, that lags.
Do you, so I like to introduce beat sheets to writers who haven't, sometimes that gets missed in your, education, and how to use a beat sheet and to kind of overlay that. Yep. I see Christine. And so that's really educational when you're working with an author for a long period of time. You're not just doing a copy edit, you're really like diving in as a developmental editor. The other thing I've been seeing, so I like to do a lot of fantasy editing and magical type books and things. There are times when something gets introduced, like an element of magic or a fantastical element that gets introduced too late, and you're like, wait, whoa, they have what power? Or like, I mean, you need to hint to things. Like, you don't have to give everything away, but you can't just go like, bam, now we're in a full-fledged paranormal fantasy whatever book, and you kind of thought you were starting with some sort of contemporary novel, but you didn't realize that it was going to be magical, like realism or something. So sometimes people aren't quite sure what they're writing, and they need help guiding through like the trope, the actual way you approach that. So I think that's kind of the main things that I see. I mean, there's always the grammar stuff, and then people often have their proclivities for overused words. And I've got my whole list of my own that I have to check for. So,
yeah, I want to say something about what Valerie just said about people not knowing where their book sits. One of the things I ask right up front is they send me a summary of the book, the genre, and 2 books they think it's like. So even if they're a newer writer, it's starting to focus. It's like, where do you want me to focus? What shelf does it sit on? And do you know what shelf it sits on?
right. Who are your neighbors going to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then that helps when you talk about the structure with them of the story they've given you.
Yeah. And as an agent in particular, I ran across there were a lot of, not a lot, but there's always like this handful of people out there. And I'm going to say it because all of them have been men, but they're like, oh, my book is like, it's like all these genres. It's like it's genre busting. It fits in, like, it can go anywhere. And I'm like, that's not helpful. Like, we don't,
that doesn't help me at all.
Like, yeah. Like, oh, it's just going to appeal to people who read. Like, you have to, and they're like, no, that's what makes it so awesome. And you're like, it's really not. Like, I'm going to tell you this, and I hate it because I love the creative side of this, but like, if you're going to try to get your book published, even if you're going to publish it, if you're going to publish it yourself, but you're going to try to get it sold to people, it's a product, and you have to know where that product fits and how it's going to be sold. And you can't just walk out and be like, everyone will love it, because no one will pay attention, because that's not a way to sell something. So yeah, that's a really good one. It's like, what genre is this? Where does it sit on a shelf? Who does it sit next to? If someone's a huge Karen Slaughter fan, are you going to go, oh, I have the right manuscript for you then? Like, what is that? Because yeah, it's that question of like, well, I think it might be this. And it's like, well, then it's nothing, at least not yet. Like, it's still a big old question mark in your head, which is fine, but just keep writing, and like, maybe don't hire an editor yet. Maybe keep writing and figure that out.
That's the tough love component of being an editor, guiding people. And sometimes that can get like tricky as well.
Well, I try and be right up front and say, I'm not going to be kind to you in my notes. I'll say when things are working, but my job is for you to have a publishable manuscript as best as I can with the story I'm given.
Yeah, I always tell them, I'm not your therapist, or I'm not your therapist. I'm like your therapist. Like, you don't hire a therapist and go in and talk to them because they're going to be like, you were right. You did that.
You're so nice. Yeah.
You did that excellently. Well done. Like, you go in there for critical feedback that's going to help you think about things and become better. And like, that's what I'm going to do. And like, I am a fun person, and like, I'll be able to make you laugh, and we'll have a good time doing it probably, but it's going to be some hard work, and I don't sugarcoat things. And I mean, I have one client who I always tell her, like, I love you. I am not going to talk to you for 72 hours after I send you notes, because those 72 hours, she wants to use my face as a dartboard. But like, it slowly gets better. And then by the 72-hour mark, she's like, oh, I think you might be right. And I'm like, this is why I don't answer your calls 20 minutes after I've sent you something. I just don't. But like, I made the mistake the first time I worked with her, and I will never make that mistake again. I will never answer that call 20 minutes after I've sent notes again. Tough love, baby.
That's funny. So Sharon P. Lynn asks in the chat, is there one editing question that you get all of the time, and how do you answer it? Kim?
I don't think I get one editing question all the time.
Okay.
No, I can't think. I have to think about that.
Okay. Val?
No, I'm in the same boat. I mean, yeah, no, I don't think there's one particular question. I mean, other than like somebody who's brand new and is really nervous about sharing their work, where they probably should have had a critique group or some beta readers and that kind of thing. And they're like, is this any good? And like, that's like, well, that's a hard question because you want to point out where the potential is. And, like what the compliment sandwich, what you're doing right. And, there's work to be done. And that's often before, those are people who aren't ready for the edit yet, probably. So.
Yeah. Gretchen?
I would say as an editor, I get the question a lot of, do you have someone who will publish this? Which is not an editing question, but it is a question I get a lot because they do know that I used to be an agent and that I work closely with Victoria Sanders and Associates and many of her clients. And that's always an awkward question because no, like I'm not a scout. I don't do that. I mean, there's been one or two manuscripts ever in my career where I've said like, oh, I actually do know the perfect person for this. Let me actually, recommend them. But it's funny because I have agent friends who will be like, oh yeah, this person like sent this to me and said that you referred them. And I was like, no, I didn't. And they're like, oh no, I know if you refer someone, you'll like actually call me yourself. I was like, yeah, I don't ever like, which is why sometimes I'm better off working with people who already have publishers or already have agents, because I'm in this weird position of that sometimes happens when I work with unagented authors who do want to go the traditional publishing route. It's kind of creates an awkward situation for many of us. And sometimes disappointed, expectations on their side. They're sort of like, oh, well, I worked with Gretchen. And I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. It means your manuscript's better than it was before. It's all it means. And then as far as editing question though, an actual editing question, it's funny. I think those actually come in like trends as well. Because I go to Thriller Fest every year, and like 2 years in a row, every author I talked to, or almost every author, obviously hyperbole, was like, I heard I shouldn't do a prologue. And I'm like, what? Who told you that? And they're like, well, I heard it in one of the master classes. And I'm like, well, you probably heard that from an author who's teaching a master class, and that author doesn't like prologues. But like any editor, a freelance editor or an editor who's like, acquiring books is not going to not get a book because of a prologue. Like they know just as easy, like, is the writing good? Does it need a prologue? Is it, like, so, and sometimes I get those like, oh, I heard I wasn't supposed to write in first person. And I'm like, I don't know where you're getting that from. So a lot of times it's like a very general, like, oh, I heard this from like this one person. And I'm like, I don't know why all of a sudden everyone is adopting this as like Bible, like, like I must, this is how you write a thriller. But yeah, so I think that those come in sort of like waves too, is that like every now and then you get like a bunch of people going, oh, I heard no prologues, I heard no first person. So yeah, I would say like for the last year, for like the years before the pandemic, it was prologues. And then the last year it's been like, oh, almost everyone, I heard I'm not supposed to do first person. I'm like, what? That's fine. You're good. So as long as it makes sense and it's good writing, you'll be fine. So yeah, I think that one's sort of the trend at the moment. For
rumors that get spread through the writing community.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Someone very harshly in one class was like, I hate this. And everyone went, oh, I can't do it then. It's like, well, it's hard, but you can do it if you do it well.
Kim, did you think of something?
No.
Okay. Oh, that's good.
No. No, I think it actually is that thing. Do you think it's publishable? Should I get an agent? What should I do? And one thing I do tell people to do is, while I'm doing this developmental edit, I want you to start writing your synopsis. So they're not sitting there waiting, oh my God, it's going to be terrible when it comes back and whatever. It's like still in their head. the story. So they have something to do waiting for me.
That's a
Cool.
good idea to give them like
Yeah.
homework while you're, that
Yeah,
doesn't,
it's like you do
manuscript.
this.
but yeah, that's a good idea.
I like it.
Yeah, I might have to steal that from you. That's really good. I like
Yeah, please do. It's helpful because then they have it too at the end, and then it's just anything you've changed in the book. It's just the little changes in the synopsis. So
that's a
Cool.
great idea.
Great advice. So can you list 3 ways that writers can level up, or any ways that writers can level up their writing before sending it to an editor? Valerie, you want to take it?
Let it marinate for a while, and then look at it again, read it out loud to yourself, and you'll find all kinds of errors. I love that. I mean, it's a little annoying for anybody who's in your house with you to be reading, and you have to do it over the course of a few days. You're going to lose your voice. But I know there's programs that'll read back to you, and that can be helpful too, to listen to it. You catch a lot of things. You catch repetition of phrases that it's going to trip your reader up. Odd things that you might do with certain words, just bad habits. But also you're going to realize whether your dialogue works if you're reading it through, and whether it's stilted or whether you can drop dialogue tags, all kinds of little things. So marinate, read it out loud, have some beta readers, but make sure your beta readers actually read in the genre that you write, and they're not just your neighbor or your mom or your cousin or whatever.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like, well, my so-and-so said they didn't like whatever. I'm like, wait, who is this person and what do they normally read? Like that, they're not going to know. It's the same thing with trying to find an editor who likes, the type of book that you write. The other thing is, eventually your own weaknesses, right? And you'll know to check for them. Like we talked about a little bit, like weak verbs. I'm like that, just, and had. What is wrong with me? I do not know. However, I have to go through and search and eliminate. And pretty much most of those can go. I mean, not all of them, I suppose, but there's so many. And it's very, very, not when you search. And then I don't know if you can see that function anymore, like the quantity of that word in a manuscript. Yeah, that's a problem. We need to fix that. But know those. So like, keep your own cheat sheet. Of things that that you probably do, and you don't necessarily want to over edit as you're writing, because you want to get your writing down on paper, get that draft down, but know those things. So I guess it's more like the 4 things. So.
Okay, that's cool. Gretchen, what do you think?
Well, I 100% agree with marinating and getting some beta readers who are familiar with the genre, and also who aren't just, I don't know. I mean, my family members, like I got a couple who, if I gave them my manuscript, they would not hesitate to be like, well, let me tell you what sucks. Which, love it. That's what I would be looking at, like they've read my stuff, and, my husband, he's the first person who reads anything that I write. And when we first got together 17 years ago, I would argue with him. And now I'm like, I know you have to be the first person, because I'll actually, like, I know to listen to you. I respect you, like I'll pay attention. So I mean, but also, don't give it to like your mom who's just going to coddle you and be like, you finished a manuscript, which is what my mom does. Not helpful. I mean, thanks for the ego boost, but not helpful at all. So there's that. I would also say, it was like, my screen didn't pause. I had it in my head. What was it? It was, oh, I'm a big fan of said. Said is a wonderful dialogue tag. Said is freaking fantastic. And a lot of people will send stuff they shout and they mutter and they mumble and they breathe and they sigh and I mean, not even things that aren't dialogue tags, which is a whole nother issue. You can't smile words, but or not them. I'm not nodding yes, I'm saying yes while I nod. But beyond that, it's like just the people who are like, like I said, uttered, muttered, inquired, like all kinds of, it's just like said is fine, asked is fine. A lot of times you actually don't need it if you have a conversation going, especially with 2 people, and it's really clear, okay, it's that person, now it's the other, now it's the other, like you don't need it every time. And that's one that drives me crazy, is seeing people who are like, oh, I heard you're not supposed to use said. I'm like, oh, that was the opposite. I don't know where you saw that, but no, that is mine. So yeah, I would have everyone look through their manuscripts for dialogue where it's just, where it's that. I think I had another one and it's gone out of my head. So please, Kim, go ahead. I'll jump in if I remember.
This isn't one of my three, but I'm going to double down on said. We don't see it, so it works. It just is gone. It's invisible in the eye. So, but it lets you know who's speaking at that moment if you're lost in that. Otherwise, just use action. And you only need one or two. We don't need every single line that everyone says what they're doing, because then you're in that business stuff. That's not my three. I'm just saying said is wonderful. Okay, so I would say I agree on let it sit. Let it sit for a while, leave it alone, go to the beach, go do something else for sure. And I also agree to listen to it, whether you read it aloud or what I do is I use Speechify. And I will do a chapter at a time and I can watch it and hear it at the same time. And I buy Speechify because it's Gwyneth Paltrow's voice and it's a really good narration. So, and it gets faster and faster. So I actually can see my problems much faster than if I'm reading it myself or reading it out loud. So Speechify, Word does it too, but it's more robotic voice. But it does the same thing. You will hear so many things if you do that. I also say to take your book and put it on your ebook or Kindle as a book. Sit down with no pen or nothing, but the minute you put it in that format and read it, you're a reader. So you'll start having things like your eye glosses over a section and your writer part will say, oh, I just know that section. That's fine. I don't need to read that. But really what that means is that's dull as hell. So you need to take a note and say, check this because it's boring. Or you can see that way where the plot's going up, the stakes are going up, or did you intentionally do the right pacing to get where you need to go? And it's just a great detachment. So I will have everybody do that. And yes, TK, I use Scrivener. Scrivener's brilliant. Brilliant. But those are my three things. Let it sit, use a Speechify or Word Speech to listen to it and read it on an ebook.
Yeah, Speechify, I haven't heard of that. That sounds like a really great tool.
I'm going to jump back into on that. So seeing it on the screen. So I mean, most of us probably write on our computers, right? I mean, I know there's a few people who will write longhand. I don't know how people do that, a whole book longhand, but some people do.
I wrote the companion all longhand.
Did you? I'm so in awe of
with
that.
a fountain pen on really cool, beautiful paper. It's loose paper.
Oh, that's awesome. And you've got that somewhere safe as like an archive, right?
Yeah.
I think too, though, editing on the screen, I'm not as great an editor on the screen. I always have to print things out. And I do that also for clients. Like I have to have it in, normal manuscript format, 8.5 by 11 and just see it on the page. But I love what you said about where you're skimming. So I write for the children's market. So particularly middle grade, which has not yet sold. Hello, I'd love a call from my agent. That'd be cool. And the beta readers I have, they're younger, right? And I just give them really simple instructions. If you start skimming, draw a line through what you didn't think was important. And then what you think is funny, just do a smiley face. If something made you laugh or whatever, if there's a word that you can't figure out from the other words around it, circle that word. So I'm giving really, specific instructions to the kids so that it doesn't feel overwhelming to be a beta reader. And they love doing it and they're wonderful, but you want to make it, easy and less daunting.
Honestly, it's also great advice though for people who are beta reading, especially if they are family members or that sort of thing, or just friends who aren't also writers, because I encourage anyone who can find another writer as a beta reader, yes, absolutely do that. But if you are just like, you really trust someone in your life and they also do really love that genre, like, yeah, definitely give it to them, but like give them a few questions, like tell them specifically what it is that you are worried about. And I love the idea of like, if you start to skim, like tell me where that was, draw that line through it. Like those are really great ideas. And I did remember my other thing, which was actually I get a lot of people who are like, I'm going to go through it again before I send it to you to like try to fix the grammar. I'm like, how bad's your grammar? Like, just no. I mean, like, so like, yes, please don't send me like just, you know, something that I have to try to decipher. But like, if you're a regular, you know, if you're a writer who has a general grasp of things, like I don't expect you to have perfect punctuation. I don't expect you to have caught every typo. And especially if you're sending it to me for developmental editing, you are so
Right.
far from the polishing stage. Don't spend your time doing that. Like at least I tell people that, because I'm just like, I don't want you spending your time polishing this for me when I'm probably going to tell you to like rewrite a lot of it. Like, yes, please don't send me pure gibberish again, but like, you know, don't worry about polish for something that is going to someone who's going to suggest you revise things. You know, like the polish stage is for later. And also you probably aren't that good at it anyway. So like, don't get uptight about it. It's going to be fine. So that's actually one of the ones that like, I'm typically like, just like settle it down and actually don't worry about that part before you send it off, because like we're worried about leveling up character development and dialogue and pacing, and like, is the action to narrative to dialogue ratio good? Like, you know, that's what we're looking at. We're not looking at like, you don't know how to use semicolons. Like, that's fine. Keep using them wrong. I don't care. I'll
Or
fix
like
it later, or someone else will, most likely, but you know,
Yeah.
it'll be fine.
like M dashes and N dash. Oh my gosh, the M dash debate. So
Yeah, I just had to take like 80 out of a manuscript I was editing for source books. I was like, oh my God. But it was published in the UK first. And I'm like, that's what it is. I trained partially in UK and Australian editing English as well when I was at an Australian university. And like, they don't mind comma splices. There's all kinds of stuff that like the Brits do different than us. And I was like, ooh, she really took advantage of that. Ended half of her sentences with M dashes, but no one was getting interrupted.
Really interesting, you guys. This has been great. I have a question on the chat from Jude, and she says it's a little involved. So Jude, I'll let you ask your question.
Okay, you may have seen it. My background, I mean, some of what you're saying to me is very familiar. My background is as an academic and as an academic librarian. And part of what I taught was writing. So, and I've done a little professional writing. I created a whole kind of Purdue writing lab kind of thing for an online university. So I have a lot of writerliness, I guess you could say, rules and regs and everything you're saying, I'm clicking in there. What I'm writing, I'm comfortable with what I'm writing. I know I have to have things looked at and all that kind of stuff. But as I'm looking at, and I follow people on Twitter, I go to these kind of things, I'm finding that a lot of the agents and editors are, and this is, I don't know how to say this delicately, they're younger than me, and it's not an reverse ageism, but my characters are all in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm also writing very familiar with the academic scene. And so when I look at agents who are talking about, well, I do mysteries, or I do this kind of thing, because at the moment, what I'm working on is academic mystery. Trying to find a person who you click with, who you're going to not just click with in terms of their skill set, because I'm hearing really powerful, good stuff from the three of you that I'm like, yeah, and like, who do I talk to and who will I call, kind of things. But trying to find someone who's going to, I guess you could say, grok where I'm coming from as an older writer, an experienced writer, and really as an academic. I mean, I'm writing completely, I shouldn't say completely what I know, but I'm writing completely out of a world that I'm very familiar with. And I don't want to have to, or maybe that's the best way to say it. I'm very familiar with a certain world. I don't want to have to bring my agent/editor up to speed, but at the same time, I don't want to over describe and over everything so that I make sure they get it. I know who my audience is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be who my editor is or agent. Is that working at all?
Mm-hmm. And I think, Jude, if I could jump in here, I think, Jude, that sort of thing is also an issue, particularly with historical fiction and historical mysteries. It's like, how do I describe this world so people get it? It's a world building you're doing, and it's your world that you know deeply well. So in historical fiction, the problem that I see a lot with that is people over explain the world. So instead of the 2 or 3 telling details that are going to let me know that world, And at each moment, you just drop in those little telling details and what the character sees or doesn't see. And that is really important. So if you're in 1855, you're walking down the street, you don't see the carriages going by. So why are you describing them in the story? You're going to describe it when the carriage goes by and the mud flicks up on you. Then I know something. Now I have a telling detail. It tells me about the story. So
Yeah, and I think part of it is, many of the, when you look at the comparables, the academic mysteries are often from the student's perspective, or it's some young assistant professor whose husband happens to be a cop. You know, it's like I'm writing it in. I don't want to have someone read and go, oh yeah, when I was in college, I remember my professor was X. I'm writing for the professor. You know, so it's I'm
right.
hearing what you're saying, but it's like, how do you? Well, I guess it's how do you get the flavor without overdoing it.
Why don't you look at Carolyn Heilbrunn? She wrote all the Amanda Cross books. Those might give you exactly what you want.
No, I've got her stuff, and of course Dorothy Sayers. I mean, a lot of older stuff. There's someone I just read, and now I can't remember the author, but it was from the student's perspective. But they had a very rich context. It was a college that specialized in theater, so there was a real rich sense of the professors and stuff. So it's just kind of trying to get a vibe of I don't want to come across, I'm concerned about ageism, but I don't want to flip it and be a jerk to younger agents and editors because they don't come from or have a sense of the world that I have. To say you write a thriller or to say you write historical fiction, yeah, and it's I don't know, I may be overthinking this too, but I've worked with so many students over the years and worked with so many different professors at 8 different universities. It's kind of like it's so in what I am, but I don't want to basically mess it up by overdoing it in the book itself. I am overthinking.
And it is a balance. I mean, it is for it is for a lot of thrillers, to be honest. I mean, I was working on a techno thriller recently, and the guy was saying stuff. The guy was writing things like about cryptocurrency and whatnot, and it was like, Michael, you have to explain what cryptocurrency is. And he was like, no, people know what cryptocurrency is. And I was like, no, they don't. And not everyone. And he was like, well, I don't want to sound like I'm talking down to the reader. And I was like, you won't, but you do have to explain a little bit. Like, you can't just.
I think that's it.
Yeah. So it's like, it is a balance, and it is with anything like historical fiction and that sort of thing. Like, and in the end, that guy actually ended up being incredibly good at explaining things in a way that was not, being talked down to it. You weren't like, what? I don't get it. And also though, I don't know if you've seen it, but have you seen The Chair on Netflix with Sandra?
Netflix, and I've read about it, but I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's my husband was watching it, the PhD candidate who's teaching at UW, and as I learned, and yeah, he was like, this is a little too close to home. He was like, this is like hitting me in this place, because it was all about like the academic, the ins and outs of working for a university and what that's like for. It was all
university politics are death.
Yes. Yeah. He's like, this is not entertainment for me. I was like, I understand. So I mean, and I the thing is with agents, I feel like, having been an agent, just don't worry about like, trying to find someone who is, comes from an academic background or anything like that. Just find someone who you vibe with. Like look at the list that they represent, look at the other writers that they represent. And if they're titles that you're like, oh, okay, it's not academic thriller, but like it's it's a book that I enjoy. And I feel like the characters are, have the same vibe. I feel like the mood is the same. I feel like some of the main characters tend a little older than like, 20s or whatever. So I feel like they'll get this, that's all you need. You don't need someone who's like going to get every single aspect. That would be actually a little boring, and they would probably actually be a little too narrow as far as what they're looking at then for who to pitch. I think, something that is maybe a little bit more niche could actually really benefit from being, having someone who comes at it from a slightly different angle, because they're not necessarily of that world as well. And also it's hard to be of that world as well, because academic publishing is so different than commercial publishing. So
yeah, no, that works. And you're validating stuff that I've come up with. There's an author that I really like who's doing historical fiction, but I like what they're doing. I like their tone. I like their characterization. And that's who I'm responding to. And that's the kind of reader I want. So it's,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think, Denise, we're about at the 5-minute mark, aren't we?
Yes, we are. So
Okay.
maybe one more question, and then I can just close out with the announcements.
Okay, sounds great. So can you give any helpful resources for writers who are looking for an editor?
Other writers who have hired editors, ask your friends, ask the writing community, ask, get on the sync boards and say, who have you worked with and who was good. I would also say, there are, of course, professional organizations like EFA and that sort of thing, where you can find, you can narrow down your list by looking at, how long people have actually been in the industry, what genres they work on. If you want one who's like near you, you can look at where they're located, those types of things. But honestly, I get a lot. I think I get almost all my work now from referrals. There is the random person who will find me on the internet, but most of the time they're like, oh yeah, no, I heard your name somewhere and then I looked you up. So for me, the referral is everything. And because of that, also, I feel like, if someone has worked with someone and they speak their praises, and it's someone that the other person who's referring them is someone and respect, that just always, I think it was Kim earlier who was saying if it's someone you've read already or someone who comes to a referral, you're like, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like if someone's been referred, a lot of times I'm like, oh, Wendy? Okay. If Wendy Walker's recommending you work with me, okay. Like I know that she is going to not send people to me who are of a completely different genre than I work on and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I would just say, yeah, of course, there are always those professional places to take and look at the directories, but like referrals, ask your friends, ask the sync boards, ask the organizations you're already part of. A lot of us are there.
Yeah, great advice. Val or Kim?
Say I agree. And I saw, Tracy, that you put the Freelance Editorial Association in the chat.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't spell that out. I just kept calling it EFA.
That's okay.
So yeah, that works really well. Referrals, usually it's word of mouth. You're maybe, now we're all getting back to conferences and things where you can have more chat time with people versus just being online and say, who have you worked with? Mostly it's referrals for me as well. Let's see, Reedsy, REEDSY. Surprisingly, you can find some very, reputable people there. There is a little bit of a, check and balance system there. I mean, there again, if you don't know the person, you're going to want to be careful as you're hiring them to make sure you're going to get what you need. But one of my good friends in the Madison area just had amazing luck with editing a series with someone that she found on Reedsy. So that's another possible spot.
Yeah, Reedsy does vet their editors. You have to have a certain amount of titles that you've worked on. It can be self-published or, whatever, but they do require that you have a certain amount. So they do vet well. I will say that they are, I was on it very briefly a few years ago, and I found it very difficult to manage the communication and whatnot with because you have to do it all through Reedsy, and then also they do take a percentage, and so most of the editors on there end up charging more than they would if you found them outside of that. So
I did not realize that. Thank you.
Yeah, they do take a percentage, and so I will throw that out, that for it to make sense. I mean, a lot of us are not we're not rolling in dough, so we're not necessarily charging, so suddenly we're charging more than we have to actually still make a living. It doesn't feel great to always have to to do that on Reedsy. So that was another reason why I hopped off. But you can find a lot of great people in there. I've had tons of people who have had great experiences, and like I said, they do vet their people really well. So it is, it's a very decent option, especially if what you're looking for is just a reader or something, something that's not already going to be a super, costly endeavor. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. Kim, can you add anything?
I think recommendations and referrals, and as you're looking for an editor, doing things like this, going to webinars, listening, and it's that vibe and what you hear, connecting to that person and in the communication is really important. So that's how all of my clients have come from referral, recommendation, or they've gone to one of my workshops. So I think that's true. And if I look for an editor, it's the same way. I say, hey, I pick up the phone to Valerie. Hey, who can you recommend for this? You know?
Well, we're coming up on the hour. So I want to thank Tracey and Gretchen and Valerie and Kim for the awesome panel discussion and for all the questions from our audience too. 3 quick announcements. A reminder that next Saturday, October 29th, Sisters in Crime is hosting its fall 4-hour workshop called Get Productive, Get Paid, and Get Promoting. So please check the national website to register. In 2 weeks, on November 5th, Sisters in Crime is co-hosting the Midwest Mystery Conference. This is the one that was formerly called Murder in Mayhem in Chicago. It's also co-hosted by Mystery Writers of America. It's a full-day in-person conference that will feature many of our other Midwest siblings in crime, and it'll take place in Chicago. Learn more at MidwestMysteryConference.com. And then finally, please note that our next Wisconsin gathering will be our holiday celebration in December, the date to be determined. So please look for a future email from Tracey Phillips for more details. Until then, we want to wish you an early happy Halloween, happy Thanksgiving, and a wonderful weekend. That's all we have for now. Bye until next time.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank you
guys. What a
all.
great
Thanks
panel.
for having me. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Hey,
Yes.
everybody.
So nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you all too. Thanks so much.